The rain hammered against the glass walls of the towering boardroom, casting streaks of water like tears upon the city skyline. Jonathan Reed said, "This cannot be happening, not today." His voice trembled, though he forced his expression into one of control. Around him, the long mahogany table was crowded with executives whose eyes flickered with panic as glowing screens displayed catastrophic numbers. The company's stock had plummeted in minutes, billions erased in a breath. A chill swept across the room, not from the storm outside, but from the icy realization settling in every chest. The air was heavy, suffocating, as whispers of betrayal slithered between the men and women who once swore loyalty. Emily Carter, his most trusted ally, leaned closer and whispered, "Jonathan, someone knew this would happen." The words pierced him like a blade. At the far end of the table, Richard Hale, charismatic yet unnervingly calm, watched with folded hands. Jonathan felt his chest tighten. Something about Richard's stillness was more terrifying than the chaos around him. On the screens, red lines plunged downward, a visual graveyard of shattered fortune. Jonathan gripped the edge of the table as thunder cracked overhead, drowning the frantic voices that rose around him. In that moment, he understood that this was no accident. It was the beginning of a war he was unprepared for, but one he had no choice but to fight. Jonathan sat alone in his office hours later, the storm still clawing at the glass. The world outside seemed endless, a city wrapped in neon and rain. He pressed his forehead to his hand, mind racing with disbelief. Emily's words echoed like poison. Someone knew this would happen. He thought of the trust he had built with each member of his board, the promises, the sacrifices, the years of loyalty. Now it all felt like a brittle mask that shattered the moment fortune turned. He replayed Richard's calm expression over and over, the stillness that spoke of hidden knowledge. Jonathan muttered, "If this was betrayal, then it was planned for months." The thunder outside growled like a warning. His empire, the life he had built brick by brick, now felt like sand slipping through desperate fingers. The silence in his office was louder than the storm. The next morning, headlines screamed across every news outlet. Titan Corp on the brink of collapse. Owners. The words were brutal, sharp as daggers. Crowds gathered outside the company's headquarters, their umbrellas dotting the wet sidewalks. Reporters shoved microphones toward trembling employees leaving the building. Inside, Jonathan watched the coverage from his private lounge, chest heavy with shame. Emily Carter entered, her voice urgent. "Jonathan, if we don't respond soon, this narrative will destroy us before we can recover." He stared at the screen where his own face filled the frame, a leader suddenly painted as a villain. He whispered to himself, "They've already chosen their story." In the boardroom once more, Richard Hale leaned back in his chair, his silver hair perfectly combed, his calm smile unshaken. Executives whispered nervously, some avoiding Jonathan's gaze. Jonathan slammed his hand on the table, startling everyone. "We need unity, not silence," he barked. Yet even as he spoke, he saw the doubt in their eyes. Richard said smoothly, "Jonathan, perhaps this is simply the natural correction of a reckless strategy." The words dripped with venom disguised as reason. Jonathan's breath hitched. He realized Richard was not just an observer. He was steering the storm. That night, Jonathan lay awake in his penthouse, overlooking the rain-drenched city. His chest ached with fear and rage. He thought of Emily's warning, Richard's smirk, the silence of his board. The empire he had bled for was slipping away. He whispered into the empty room, "If they want war, I'll give them war." But the words rang hollow, swallowed by the thunder that rolled across the skyline. His reflection in the window looked back at him, a man he no longer recognized, broken, betrayed, yet burning with a desperate will to survive. Jonathan entered the dimly lit private lounge of the Financial District Club, where shadows clung to the walls lined with old oil paintings. Across the room sat Michael Turner, the once great financial guru whose empire had collapsed years ago. Jonathan's voice carried the weight of desperation. "Michael, tell me what I'm not seeing." Michael, age heavy on his face, swirled the amber liquid in his glass and muttered, What you're facing isn't chance, it's a strategy. Someone with deep reach wants your empire gone. Jonathan's stomach twisted as he thought of Richard's calm smile. Michael leaned forward, his tired eyes locking with Jonathan's. I lived this once, and I didn't survive. Don't trust anyone wearing a smile in that boardroom. The storm outside had faded, but the silence inside felt heavier than thunder. Jonathan felt both warned and cursed, the shadow of betrayal clearer than ever. Back at headquarters, Emily Carter sifted through endless files on her glowing screen, the office bathed in sterile white light. Numbers danced across her vision like ghosts whispering secrets. She muttered, "Something doesn't add up." Jonathan approached quietly, tension etched into his face. Emily looked up, her voice hushed. The withdrawals, the missing funds, they weren't random. They were systematic. Jonathan's jaw tightened as he leaned closer. Are you telling me someone inside orchestrated this? Emily's silence said more than words. The evidence was there, buried in manipulated reports, carefully hidden but traceable to deliberate hands. Jonathan's chest ached as realization gripped him. Betrayal had roots in the very walls of his empire. Later that evening, a shadow moved in the underground parking lot. Jonathan's heart pounded as Daniel Price, a quiet financial analyst, stepped from the dim light. His face was pale, but determined. Mr. Reed, I need you to see this. He handed over a small flash drive, his voice trembling. I copied records before they could be deleted. If they find out, I'm finished. Jonathan gripped the drive, his eyes scanning Daniel's trembling hands. Why are you risking everything? Daniel replied, because the truth matters, and you're not the only one being destroyed here. Jonathan saw both fear and courage in him, realizing this whistleblower was a fragile but powerful ally. The next morning, tension thickened as Victor Lang, the company's major investor, arrived with an entourage. He paced the boardroom like a hawk, surveying prey. His voice thundered, Jonathan, my capital keeps your ship afloat, but storms don't excuse incompetence. Jonathan clenched his teeth, fighting back rage. Emily interjected cautiously, Victor, the numbers aren't what they seem. But Victor cut her off, his glare sharp. Excuses don't pay returns. Jonathan met Victor's eyes, steel against fire. Pull your investment and you sink with us. Silence spread, broken only by the hum of the storm outside. Victor smirked faintly, enjoying the power of the moment. That night, Jonathan stood in his office overlooking the skyline, the city lights blurred through rain-streaked glass. His reflection seemed like a stranger, tired eyes, clenched jaw, shoulders heavy with doubt. Emily entered quietly, her voice gentle yet sharp. Jonathan, it's not just numbers we're fighting. Someone's tearing you apart piece by piece. Jonathan whispered, and I still don't know who holds the knife. The silence stretched between them, thick with dread. He realized that each passing hour brought him closer to the truth, but also deeper into danger. For the first time, he feared he might not survive the war. Jonathan faced the board with fire in his eyes. The grand room hummed with whispers, every gaze heavy with judgment. You think I don't see what's happening? He barked. Executives shifted uncomfortably, some glancing at Richard Hale. Richard's calm voice cut through the tension. Jonathan, accusations won't rebuild trust, facts will. The words twisted like a knife, their calmness more damning than fury. Jonathan slammed documents onto the table, exposing financial gaps. These numbers don't lie. Someone here does. The silence grew suffocating as doubt spread among the board. Jonathan felt alone in a sea of suits, betrayed by those he had once called allies. Outside, the world turned cruel. Headlines painted Jonathan as reckless, cameras hounded his every step. News anchors whispered of fraud and greed. Jonathan watched from his car as crowds jeered, signs raised high with words branding him a thief. His jaw clenched, rage bubbling beneath the surface. Emily called from the back seat, if we don't change this narrative, they'll bury you alive. Jonathan's hand tightened on the steering wheel, his eyes locked on Richard's smug image plastered across a billboard. he muttered. They want me broken. But I'm not finished yet. In the lobby, chaos reigned as employees crowded with questions, their voices a storm of anger and fear. Among them stood Sarah Miller, a young single mother whose savings were tied to the company's stock. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "I trusted you." Jonathan froze, her voice cutting deeper than any headline. He realized his decisions weren't just numbers, they were lives. Emily touched his arm, urging him to move forward, but Sarah's face lingered, a reminder of the human cost. Jonathan whispered to himself, "This is the weight of every betrayal." That evening, Jonathan met Michael Turner again, this time in a dim jazz bar, with smoke curling above dim lamps. Michael's voice was low. "You're not losing to the market, Jonathan. You're losing to men who know how to bleed you." Jonathan leaned closer, fury in his eyes. "Then tell me how to fight them." Michael shook his head slowly. "You can't fight them clean. That's how I lost everything." Jonathan's pulse raced as the truth sank in. His path to survival might demand a price darker than he ever imagined. Back at his penthouse, Jonathan stared at the flash drive Daniel had given him. He slid it into his laptop, the room lit only by the screen's glow. Files unfolded like wounds, revealing deliberate sabotage. Transfers, false reports, hidden accounts, all pointing inward. His stomach sank as one name surfaced in multiple documents. He whispered, "It was planned all along." His reflection in the dark glass showed a man unraveling, caught between rage and despair. For the first time, he saw the war not just as survival, but as vengeance. The boardroom was thick with unease, the air brittle as Jonathan's closest ally, Emily, confronted him in private before the meeting. She said, "You need to stop hesitating, Jonathan, before Richard takes everything." Her voice was sharp, but trembling. Jonathan pressed his hands against the glass wall, staring at the stormy skyline. "Every move feels like I'm walking into a trap," he muttered. Emily stepped closer, her eyes burning. "Then set the trap yourself. Show them strength, or they'll smell blood." Jonathan turned, fire flickering in his gaze. For the first time he felt the weight shift, not from defeat but from a spark of defiance. Jonathan acted quickly, pulling risky capital from an offshore account and redirecting it into a volatile investment. His office glowed with screens, each number a potential lifeline or a dagger. Emily warned, "This gamble could bury us if it fails." Jonathan's reply was cold. "If I don't gamble, I'm already buried." His hands shook as he clicked the final command, sending millions into uncertainty. Outside, lightning cracked like the gods themselves watching the move. In that moment, Jonathan realized he was no longer playing defense. He was declaring war. Victor Lang stormed into the boardroom the next morning, his entourage following like vultures. His voice boomed, "You're risking everything, Jonathan." Jonathan stood tall, his jaw tight. Everything was already at risk, Victor. The tension rippled through the room. Emily tried to intervene, but Victor cut across her with a snarl. "Investors will eat you alive for this recklessness." Jonathan shot back, "Or they'll crown me for saving them." Silence followed, every executive glued to the clash of titans. For the first time, Jonathan saw fear flash in Victor's eyes. Richard Hale played his hand with surgical precision. That evening, he announced a hostile takeover attempt, his smooth voice delivered through televised interviews. "Leadership is about stability. If Titan Corp cannot provide it, others must." Jonathan watched the broadcast, fists clenched, rage boiling. Emily whispered, "He's painting you as the villain." Jonathan shook his head. "No, he's painting himself as the savior." On the screen, Richard's calm smile was a dagger wrapped in velvet. The war was no longer hidden, it was public. Late that night, Jonathan uncovered a folder buried in digital archives. His pulse quickened as the documents revealed transfers and contracts, clear evidence linking Richard to the financial sabotage. He whispered, "This is it, the knife in my back." Emily leaned over his shoulder, her eyes widening. "If this is true, Richard's empire isn't invincible." Jonathan felt fury ignite into grim resolve. No more defense. Tomorrow I strike. Outside, the city lights burned like an army waiting for command. The following morning, Daniel Price entered Jonathan's office with urgency. His pale face betrayed sleepless nights. He placed new evidence on the desk, whispering, "I found hidden accounts. Richard siphoned millions long before the crash." Jonathan scanned the files, adrenaline coursing. He muttered, "This is the smoking gun." Emily, standing nearby, added, "With this we can expose him." Jonathan exhaled slowly, feeling both fear and empowerment. The walls of betrayal were crumbling, but the fight ahead promised blood. Jonathan turned to Emily later that day, his voice low but fierce. "I'm done being cornered. Tonight I'll confront Richard myself." Emily's face tightened with worry. "If you go alone, you won't come back the same." Jonathan's eyes burned. "That's the point." He straightened his suit jacket, each button fastened like armor. Emily touched his arm, whispering, "Then fight to win, not just to survive." Their silence carried the weight of unspoken truths, two allies bound by desperation and fragile hope. In the dimly lit bar where Michael Turner nursed another glass, Jonathan sat across from him with hardened eyes. "You told me not to fight clean," Jonathan said, his tone like steel. Michael nodded wearily. "Clean fights don't win wars." He handed Jonathan a sealed envelope. "Inside are names and numbers, allies, enemies, debts owed. Use them wisely." Jonathan's hands tightened on the envelope. Michael added, "But remember, once you use these, you can't walk back into the light." Jonathan's silence was his answer. The following night, Jonathan stormed into a private club where Richard awaited, glass of wine in hand. Richard smirked. "I wondered when you'd come." Jonathan's voice cut like a blade. "You bled my company dry and smiled while it burned." Richard leaned back, calm as ever. "Business is survival, Jonathan. And you were never built for the kill." Jonathan slammed the incriminating documents on the table. Richard's smirk faltered, the first crack in his armor. "This ends now," Jonathan growled. The confrontation spilled into silence as both men locked eyes, the storm outside rattling windows like drums of war. Richard whispered, "You think exposing me will save you? It will ruin us both." Jonathan leaned forward, his voice steady. "Then I'll burn with you, but the world will know who struck the match." For the first time, Richard's calm cracked into anger. Jonathan felt a surge of grim victory, not in survival, but in dragging his enemy into the fire with him. The boardroom had become a battlefield. Jonathan stood at the head of the table, his jaw rigid, his eyes dark with resolve. Around him, executives whispered in fractured loyalties, torn between fear and greed. He slammed the incriminating documents down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Here is proof of Richard's betrayal," Jonathan roared. Richard leaned back, his silver hair catching the light, calm as ever. "Accusations from a desperate man mean little," he said, voice smooth. Emily stood by Jonathan's side, her voice sharp. "The numbers don't lie." Richard orchestrated this collapse. Silence gripped the room. Jonathan's chest rose and fell as he stared at his enemy across the polished table, feeling the weight of years of ambition come to this moment. Richard rose slowly, his voice low but cutting. "Jonathan, your empire was always a house of cards. I merely gave it a push." The room gasped, his words like poison spilling across marble floors. Jonathan clenched his fists, trembling with rage. Emily hissed, "He's admitting it." Richard smirked, pacing like a predator. "But who here will stand with a sinking captain? Better to side with survival." Executives shifted uncomfortably, some nodding, some shrinking away. Jonathan shouted, "If you choose him, you choose ruin." For the first time, the divide in the board became a living thing, loyalty and betrayal colliding in the open. As tension rose, Victor Lang slammed his palm on the table, his voice thunderous. "Enough. My capital is on the line." His glare moved from Jonathan to Richard, weighing their strength. "I will not back a man who cannot protect my investment." Jonathan leaned forward, his voice steady but burning. If you side with Richard, your fortune dies with him. Victor sneered, but his eyes betrayed doubt. Emily whispered, he's close to cracking. Richard's jaw tightened, sensing control slipping. For the first time, Jonathan saw cracks in his rival's armor, faint but real. It was the opening he had been waiting for. Daniel Price entered quietly, clutching files with trembling hands. I have proof, he stammered. The room shifted as eyes turned to him. Jonathan gestured for him to speak. Daniel's voice shook. Richard diverted company funds into private accounts abroad. I copied the records. Richard's eyes narrowed dangerously, venom flashing in his calm facade. Jonathan took the files, lifting them for all to see. Here is the truth, plain and undeniable. Gasps echoed across the boardroom, a wave of realization crashing down. Richard growled, "You think this will destroy me? You underestimate how deep my reach goes." The battle was no longer financial. It was survival. The confrontation peaked as Jonathan stood, his voice rising above the storm outside. Richard Hale betrayed this company and every one of you. You must choose now, truth or corruption. Richard slammed his fist down, his mask of calm shattered. You'll regret this, Jonathan. I'll bury you before you bury me. Jonathan leaned closer across the table, his voice cold as steel. You already buried yourself. I'm just revealing the grave. The storm outside howled as if the city itself bore witness. The boardroom erupted into chaos, alliances breaking, loyalties tested. Jonathan knew the war had reached its climax. The next morning, headlines flooded every screen. Titan Corp betrayal exposed. Crowds swarmed the headquarters, their chants echoing through the streets. Jonathan stood at his window watching with hollow eyes. Emily entered, exhausted yet relieved. They know the truth now, she whispered. Jonathan replied, the truth doesn't save what we've already lost. His empire had been gutted, even with Richard exposed. Down below, protesters held signs with Richard's name crossed out, but Jonathan felt no victory. It was survival, nothing more. His reflection in the glass showed a man forever changed, scarred, weary, but alive. Inside the press conference hall, flashes erupted as Jonathan stepped to the podium. His voice carried the gravity of war. This company has faced betrayal, but it will rise again. Reporters shouted questions, cameras clicking like gunfire. Emily stood nearby, her eyes fixed on him with cautious pride. Jonathan paused, his throat tight. I will not deny my failures, but I will not allow corruption to define us. The crowd murmured, some skeptical, some moved. For the first time, Jonathan was not just a CEO. He was a man confronting his own ruin and daring to rebuild. That evening, Jonathan returned to his penthouse. The city glowed beneath the rain-washed sky, neon lights reflecting in dark puddles. He poured a glass of whiskey, staring at the documents that once defined his empire. Emily arrived quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. You fought the war, Jonathan. Now fight for yourself. He sighed, his voice ragged. I don't know who I am without the empire. She squeezed his arm. Then find out. This time without betrayal. The silence that followed was not heavy. It was fragile, like the beginning of something new. Meanwhile, Richard Hale sat alone in a darkened mansion, his empire collapsing piece by piece. His calm mask gone, he hurled a glass against the wall, shards scattering like broken pride. He muttered bitterly, they think I'm finished. But men like me never truly fall. Yet as silence settled, the grandeur around him felt like an empty cage. His eyes burned with fury, but behind them flickered the shadow of defeat. The man who once ruled through charm and calculation was now a king without a kingdom. In the final hours of the night, Jonathan stood once more at his window, the storm now gone, the city calm. He whispered to himself, betrayal changes everything. It destroys, but it also reveals. Emily joined him, her presence quiet but strong. Together, they stared at the city below, no longer rulers of an empire but survivors of its ashes. Jonathan's reflection looked back at him, not the man he once was, but someone scarred, hardened and still breathing. In that silence, the story ended not with triumph, nor with ruin, but with the haunting truth that survival itself is sometimes the darkest victory.